All right, Michelle. So you have some cool stuff. Let me frame this for the listeners out there. First, if you're thinking about APAC and you're thinking about regions outside the US, you have to look at Australia, Singapore, Southeast Asia, you name it. And then two, you got a really cool model. And so we're going to kind of discuss what your model looks like. And then three, you have some cool data. So we got a lot to uncover. But Michelle, you want to start by giving a little intro to our listeners and talk about the awesome work you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. So I'm Michelle. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Fractional Directory, and we're a Singapore company, but I live in New Zealand, so I'm really like living the dream here. We operate across Asia Pacific, and at the moment, that means Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore, with an eye to broader Asia Pacific. You'll hear I love data. So in my past life, I've worked in big tech. I've worked in Oracle, Cisco, always in kind of revenue strategy enablement. And now, as a founder of a tech startup, I'm just sitting here staring at things, trying to watch them move. And that's probably what we're going to end up talking about a lot today is my little petri dish and what we've learned in about 3 years of sitting here and building a technology product that's pretty, about 6 months into being properly commercialized.
I love it. Let's dig into. Tell us about your background. Talk about
Yeah.
your background, and you are American, even though you're in New Zealand. And so give us the lowdown, and then we're gonna back into why in the world get into this industry because it is a painful one, Michelle. You make a lot more money staying at Salesforce or a typical tech role, that's for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of unrecorded conversations of you and I having therapy sessions about how painful this is, Matt. But yeah, so I gave like the broad brush overview, but basically, so I went to school, adjacent to Silicon Valley, which I never said or contextualized until I moved outside of the US and I realized that that was a thing. The reason that it's relevant is because I actually, here's a fun fact. I almost quit school my second year of university because I worked for a tech startup that hired me and offered me a full time job. So I should have probably taken that as a sign I should never go into startups. But anyway, I graduated and I ended up working first for Salesforce actually as a sourcer, and that kind of informed a lot of what I've built is just looking at how hard it is to look at these giant pools of people and then hunt down, exactly the right person for these. Really, at the time, Salesforce was super hot. So it was like, I mean, not that it's not now, but like it was like everybody wanted to work there. And so we were like sifting through huge amounts of talent data, right? And then I ended up working for Oracle and running their kind of post university program that trained all of their BD for the first year of kind of postgraduate. And then I worked at App Dynamics, which was acquired by Cisco. And I built a really fun experimental enablement team that included designers and a bunch of kind of content experts so that we could scale some of the messaging from the startup into the giant Cisco machine. And then I moved to London and ran our CXC, which was kind of the shorthand for our big innovations centers across Europe and the Middle East, and got to have really cool conversations about innovation with all of our enterprise customers. And then COVID hit, and my husband and I were sitting in my living room. We were like, "What are we doing with our life?" And his family in New Zealand were kind of waving the flag at us, going, "Are you guys ever going to have kids? Are you ever going to settle down?" In mid 30s, we kind of went, "Let's go to New Zealand and see what happened." And that was 5 years ago. No, 6 years ago now. And basically never looked back. Just hopped on a plane, came to New Zealand, had two kids, started a startup, and here we are. So that's the life story.
Regionally. So you've had this really cool experience of going, hey, super US centric, literally as Americans you can get being in
Yep.
Silicon Valley.
Yep.
Uh, were you in SF or were you in South Bay?
No, I was
How
like properly, I lived in like, walked to work for 9 years. Yeah.
I was there 2 weeks ago and it's a lot cleaner, Michelle, not gonna lie. And I was very happy with it. Also,
I'm
Soma,
pleased to hear that actually.
I know, right? Soma was depressing. It was pretty gutted out, but Mission Bay was great, and North Beach was rolling. But
Yeah.
so when you've looked at innovation and these, innovation teams, what is it like US compared to Europe, compared to Asia? Like, how have you seen these dynamics? Because this is all the cool thing where, like, you and I both have a massive passport, so we see
Yeah.
these patterns. But what have you noticed?
Yeah, it's so I feel like I kind of joke that I've ended up in diplomacy because ever since I spent time when I was in undergrad studying in Spain and Australia. So I've spent large chapters outside of the US, but when I worked in big tech, I remember there being this dynamic where I'd show up from corporate headquarters being like, why isn't everybody using all these global standards? Like they're so obvious. And then I'd get into these regional markets and I go, oh my gosh, like the market dynamics are just completely different. There's so many things that aren't just culture, it's how even when you look at selling, which I've always looked at, it's how you influence people is different. And so what's so interesting is that being in the US, we grow up in such an echo chamber of this giant place that is the size of Europe and has this disproportionately large economy, that what you don't realize is that it is so influential to the rest of the world's kind of economic trends that something might take off. And it doesn't mean it has traction in the US, but it will start to have traction. And then these other markets kind of light up and go, oh, why don't I experiment in that? Why don't I experiment in it? And everybody's looking to the US, oftentimes, at especially the academia side of the US, to be like, what is the North Star? And so that's kind of what I've seen as I've been out here is we're looking at things that sometimes are, Y Combinator's stuff from 15 years ago. And like that's what people are talking about, or sales methodology that I was teaching at Oracle 10 years ago is like just becoming part of discourse. And so there is actually like genuinely a lag. This is New Zealand. Um, Singapore, different story. Singapore is definitely very forward thinking, but again, like anchoring to broader Asia. So I mean, I could have a whole podcast on the differences. There's significantly different market dynamics, but we are all revolving around the same trends. And everyone ignores Asia Pacific as if it doesn't, indicate the broader market, but it really does. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here.
Yeah, it's so I think you know this. Like I started a company in 2020 in Singapore, and I first went to China in 2016, and I was like,
Mm,
holy shit, this is the future.
mhm.
I think it's interesting when looking at Europe. I don't feel like it's the future, I'll be honest. I spent my morning with Spain, Amsterdam, Paris, and so like a lot of respect for Europe, but it doesn't seem, it's Germany's really not doing well. Spain's actually doing really, really well. Poland's doing really, really well. But compared to when you look at the global economy, Asia is really, really, really doing well. And when we look at, we'll dive deeper into some of the data you have, but when we look at this world of flexible talent, freelance talent, fractional talent, whatever, the ability to dive into these alternative workforce models, it might be one of the best analogies I've heard. It might be like cellular, where it just takes a leapfrog jump, and all of a sudden people are paying with their eyes or their finger, and the US is like, did you just out innovate us? And we don't even know that existed. Not to get too geeky, but Singapore, they really, really did COVID well. And so they didn't
Yes.
have to dip too heavily into their savings, right? Their economy is balanced, strong, really good. They're neutral. So it's such an incredible place to anchor. Now, kind of dovetailing into this world of, flexible, freelance, fractional, whatever, why why and how did you get into it? Give us kind of the founder journey of getting into this painful space.
Yeah, no, it had to be a journey because when I was doing advisory and, kicking around trying to figure out what I was doing, I was like, why would anyone ever found a company, let alone a tech startup? That looks horrible. And like everyone just, terrible for your mental health. Anyway, I've ended up here. But the reason why is because I realized that I have a very, very unusual both background and relationship to this space. Because, first of all, I'm really frustrated by things that are not articulated correctly from like a go to market perspective and an offering perspective. And I've spent so much of my career in this almost like adjacent to product marketing trying to explain value. And when I moved to New Zealand, everyone went, "Oh, why don't you just kick around, do some consulting?" So I did what I thought was consulting and advisory. And then I ran into a couple people who were calling themselves either at the time it was virtual or fractional CFO and CMOs.
I
And
remember.
so I got hired as like the bottom of the funnel of a CMO, and they called me a consultant. And I was sitting here going, wait, so like, why are you called fractional and I am called consultant when I'm essentially the CRO and you're the CMO and we work great together? Like, why am I just not calling myself the same thing as you? And she was like, well, I don't know, like somebody, I don't even remember how she'd like learned the term, but there was, and I know because when we built our directory, there was 43 of us in September 2023 in the whole country using this term fractional. And so I thought, oh, this is so cool. Maybe I should just call myself this and I can evangelize this concept. And like, I fully started as a this is an interesting working model that might make New Zealand be able to use people like me that immigrate here and have trouble finding work and integrating because there's not a clear segment for us. I thought it was like a New Zealand challenge. I didn't realize it was a tech company and something that scales globally, if not APAC.
Yeah, and bring us back to that first, like, how how did you get the opportunity? Was it because you knew someone and rather than going full
100%.
time, you were like, "Let's just figure out the best way"? Like, how did you go to a platform? Hey,
Yeah,
like,
platform
how
didn't
did that happen?
exist. Hence my motivation to build one because when something is inefficient and not tech enabled, my first thought is like, why not, right? And the way I found the opportunity was literally old fashioned, which is what 90% of people are still doing. Is that I went out to my excuse me, my first and second degree network, basically said, "Hey, I'm moving to New Zealand. If anybody has contacts in Australia, New Zealand, like I'm gonna just have coffees until I am on a caffeine bender. Like, invite me to coffee, I will talk to you." And I had probably 100 coffees. And out of those, people would be like, "Oh, yeah, your background. Hey, cool. Come give me some advice." And people are like, "Doesn't matter what it's called. Like, oh, I'll bring you as a consultant and I'll do like an hourly advisory thing." I'm an executive coach as well. I'll be like, "Hey, can you work with me?" And so what I didn't realize is I basically became a portfolio career executive. And while I enjoyed that, the thing that frustrated me is I didn't like just throwing advice over the wall. And I also love building teams and just kind of did feel that ownership. And the first one that I got where I mentioned I was like the CRO fractionally with a fractional CMO, I was so happy because I was like, I'm in leadership team meetings. Like I've got a team. I'm in there 2.5 days a week, but this feels exactly the same ethos as if I was here 5 days and I can still do other stuff. So I felt like I kind of like hit this holy grail for my own personal working style. And that was literally just from my network. And that's the problem is that that's what everybody's doing is they're just going out and kind of like blindly searching for these opportunities and finding them, but it's not organized. And that's why I built a tech company to help organize it.
So I wonder there's 2 things from there, that I wanna hit on. The first is the that kinda transition of what it was like from, "Hey, I'm here," to operating efficiently, meaning, like,
Yeah.
people know how to work with you, you are
Yeah.
doing the commute in the week, but it's still a leadership position, you're embedded versus just being this contractor outside, right? So that's one thing. And then the second thing is kind of the regional implications for the models that get built. And the reason I bring this up is, increasingly here in the US at least, we'll say, "Hey, this is a transition to the human cloud," right? They'll be like, what do we care about? Whatever, like, it's a transition to the human cloud. Then they'll be like, "Well, what does that mean?" And then when we open up the hood, it's usually, all right, it's platforms and EORs. And so the platforms are everything doing the sourcing, right? The gig, the freelance, the fractional, even the staffing. And then the EORs are little the ones just taking the risk. And here in the US, like nobody wants to actually take the risk of employing directly because there's misclassification, there's all this kind of stuff. But other regions don't really have that. And Singapore is like an efficient capitalist economy that I'm assuming a lot of the crap we have to deal with. And we're like, Europe just has extreme crap,
Yeah.
right? Like Europe is
Yeah.
impossible. That one's just not fun. But so there's going to be a lot of things that we'll discuss where it's like, oh, like Singapore doesn't have to do that. Like even like China doesn't have to do that. So we can just skip these whole industries that we've had to build in the US just because they don't make sense. You don't need them in Europe. So that's going to be one of the things we talk about, which break down, if you could, break down a little bit about the model that you've chosen. And then let's do a little reversion of what it was like when you first started working as a consultant and how you had to sort of transition that into what you really would, what was really what's supposed to be happening.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm gonna take that first point you made because that is one of the biggest blockers to this organizing, and people are starting to figure it out. We're starting to see inroads, but what you're describing, like in the US, I hear it referred to a lot as like 1099 workers or whatever, right? And like here in New Zealand, we have like sole traders, or we have people that just don't mind if they're working on the company's payroll, but they just kind of figure it out. And then in Singapore, like you said, there's all kinds of engagement models. It's a lot looser. In Australia, there's kind of a hybrid. The actual paperwork part of like what kind of employee are you is not globally standardized and is also very political. Like when I joke about being a diplomat, I'm like, this is an advocacy space of being like, why are you putting so many barriers to entry for me to work autonomously? And I mean, that's obviously very much my side, is I'm sitting here going, there are workforce practices that both allow people to do this easily or not, and productivity models economically that either support flexible work because they show them as equally productive or inhibit it. And this is one of the barriers to the current structure in New Zealand is based on a 40-hour work week. So theoretically, if half of our population becomes fractional and they're doing the same productivity output in half the time, we'll tank our economic productivity until and unless that policy changes. And so there's a lot in that we're kind of having to advocate for. The structure of human capital is evolving, as you say, the same as cloud, and very similar to tech. We weren't ready to have infrastructure discussions or data privacy discussions or any of the implications of the infrastructure shift when cloud came out. And nobody is yet ready to have these human capital infrastructure discussions about this space because they're thinking, oh, it's too early. And it's like, it's not a trend, it's a fundamental shift in how human capital are working. And some people are ahead of the curve. And to be fair, it's like when we're in the US and we look at Sweden and Norway and you're like, oh, look at this amazing thing they're doing. And you're like, yeah, but that's like the size of San Diego, right? Making a consensus about something. So scale is hard. And that's, anyway, a little bit of kind of like a side thread on there, but like this is a deeply steeped and layered issue that is much bigger than just a way of working. It's a whole structure of work, right? And then when we actually look at me personally and how I interacted with this, like I went through exactly that same step of like, okay, well, this company's offering me a job as a consultant. Do I go work for them? Do I work for them 20 hours a week? Do I create a business? Do I just like sole trader is the same as almost like a freelancer? Do I just put my name, Michelle Allbon, and then you hire me? And I had to make all of those decisions the first time I got offered a job. And the company was as in the dark as I was. And this is a common theme right now is everyone's like, I need you, but I have no idea how to hire you or in what model. So just kind of like tell me what works for you. And this is where exec search to me really need to do a better job of leading this industry because there is so much opportunity to organize and to have strong opinions about what working models work well and placing people effectively in these models. And truly, everyone's just in the dark. They're just figuring it out. So, in my case, I started a company because everybody said, oh, that's the best way of doing it. And then I would contract out from my company and I created all my own templates because again, I'm a salesperson, right? So I like have my SOW, I have my contract. I went to a lawyer and said, like, how do I draw this up? And nobody knew. It was like we were literally in our communities being like, hey, what contract do you use? And we've all just like sourced. Like we have a meetup once a month at a pub here in Auckland. And like every time we talk, everybody's like, "Hey, does somebody have an example SOW? Hey, do you have this?" And we're at like grassroots of this thing. And like that's very cool, but it's also important to recognize that because when people talk about this as a global industry, I'm like, I believe it is going to be, but we are at like the very beginning, right? At least especially out here in Australia, New Zealand.
Well, to the point of you have all these different contracts. So here's one of the biggest contradictions. Even though, so companies want one neck to choke, right? They want to work with as little solutions and vendors as possible. They want one
Mhm.
neck. And then on the other side, you as the individual and you you also kind of just want a couple of people that you really like to work with, right? So
Exactly.
now there's a lot of money to be made when there are thousands and millions and all this chaos. And so I was just talking to an executive before this, and he was like, "Do you know how crazy it is that at one point we said we're gonna make money off somebody else doing the work, and we're not even gonna like really help them that much. We're just simply facilitate, right, that interaction." And I know it's not as simple as like, "Oh, look, we just found someone who needs work and someone who needs a worker," right? Like, we know it's not that simple. But if we bring it to first principle, like, what are we really doing, right? Like, we're helping other people do the work and we're trying to aid in that facilitation. Now, is that needed? Can software replace that? What does it replace? What doesn't it replace, right? So I
Yeah.
don't know. We got a lot of reckoning up ahead, and then obviously, as you know better than anyone with tech, AI throws a massive wrench in this. If I can do something in 30 minutes, or I already have a Claude skill, but it makes you $1,000,000, does that entitle me to $5 or $500,000, right?
Well,
Or
this is a really big topic, and this is something that I'm in. I found myself doing quite a lot of market education out here because of sitting and staring at this. I'm seeing a lot of the trends that are coming together, and I have a slide that I talk through which shows that the kind of most sophisticated fractional leaders, the people who like are really doing this well, they're making the highest margin, like they're consistently getting work, they have this kind of like iceberg layer under them where you're hiring the person and you're like, cool, I'm hiring like a CMO. Or, well, maybe CMO, everybody's used to marketing firms. So I won't use that example. Let's consider like a CTO, right? And so they are your person, just the same as if you hire like a consulting firm, you get like your account manager and all the work is done by all the peons or whatever, right? But in this case, it's like a fractional leader 2.5 days a week. And they're like, these are the outcomes that I'm going to get you. And most people have either kind of this invisible team and the concept of offshoring, which I actually genuinely do not like the word because to me, I'm like, it's the same people that are here, they just are in a place with lower currency, like, straight up. Like, there's exceptionally amazing people around the world who are just, a victim of their own currency being lower, and what they do is they go and find these amazing people that are networked into lower currency, and they build AI agents that are also part of their team. So what happens is you get this fractional leader and you're thinking, "Oh, I have a fractional leader." It's like, "No, you have a team of 5 people in 3 countries and 3 AI agents." And that is the answer to how they're producing 2.5 days of a week of more than a 5 day a week traditional human because everybody's not talking about it, but there's this entire invisible layer under sophisticated fractional people. And this is how work is being done.
yeah, and let me ask you, like, so you keep mentioning, like, 2.5 days.
Yeah.
Let's kinda get into, like, the different models because even that kinda cracks me up. Like, I don't I don't care about 2.5 days, but like, at least here in the US, like, why would we say 2.5 days? All right, because then, like, legally, like, the company doesn't have to assume that they need to pay me overtime and benefits because 30 hours is the thing, right? So,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I say 2.5 days, but I really don't care. And to your point about the CTO, like, what is the CTO doing? Are they managing a site that is bringing in $20 million a year at this currency and they'll keep the site running? Like, if yes, I don't care if it's 2.5 days, but so what?
Well, yeah, I can tell you why I care because as the worker, it's a worker protection thing more than a company protection.
Go. This is we're gonna get into the worker protection. Okay. So give me the model. So tell me the different models, and then let's hit the head on like 2.5 days. Who
Yeah.
cares? Why do I have to do it? And is that even the right thing, or is it going to switch over to outcome based, or is there certain times you do outcome based versus time? But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
why two and a
I've
half days?
got real strong opinions about this, both because I've worked as a portfolio career executive, which is now the fancy word of us describing ourselves. Fractional is that really embedded, like you're definitely the domain leader or line of business leader. And that's one very specific model. Like there isn't another CMO or CRO, like I'm the person, I'm embedded with the leadership team, right? But that is by far the heaviest flexible model when you look at the other ones. Consulting, which has been around forever, is significantly less rigid because you're going, okay, I need some outcomes. And it is super outcome oriented to say, you're going to get me these things. And sometimes maybe they're cross line of business. Like in go to market, you might go, I need a bit of pricing, I need a bit of sales, I need you to do some product marketing. And the problem is that you're not fitting within this nice linear scope of being a line of business leader. You're kind of zooming across stuff. And usually you're not necessarily doing like leadership development, you're doing outcomes, right? So it tends to be a bit more of like an IC focus. As a portfolio career executive, you do all of it. Like I'm fractional, I've done plenty of consulting. And then advisory is that like hourly, like I'm talking to you an hour a week and I'm just teaching you to fish. And then actually, executive coaching fits in this portfolio too, because like as an executive coach, I'm like, I am basically doing advisory, but we're talking about people things instead of company things. And so all of these models, fractional consulting, advisory, coaching, these all fit within kind of the same bucket. And what happens is that people haphazardly take these things on and they are like, oh, I'm doing hourly fractional and hourly consulting, and then at the odd hour here. And next thing you know, they're not used to managing 50 hours of random stuff that sometimes pops off from a capacity perspective. And it's a massive risk because they don't know how to manage their time appropriately. And frankly, you cannot control your time. If you have three or four clients, even if it's the odd hour, there's times that dial turns up, right? So, this kind of 2.5 days a week and working in days instead of hours is something that I'm real passionate about because it helps both you protect your own real true capacity and it also helps set correct expectations with companies. So in coaching and advisory, everyone gets it. It's an hour, maybe 90 minutes, right? Consulting, like it's outcomes. And when you're looking at hours, if they're valuable, like executive level outcomes, nobody's actually trying to do hours. They're just trying to kind of make sure you're working enough, right? And so in fractional, there's sometimes like we have people because we're an early stage startup, right? We've had people on 2 days a month because that's what we can afford. But that represents about 16 hours over a month. And what's good is we have this really mature conversation of like, hey, we needed to use you a lot this week. So this is probably going to need to add a half day or maybe a day, but we increase scope increments by half and full days instead of like, hey, can you do a couple more hours? Because I'm not checking timesheets, right? And it's the same when you're trying to scope a strategic outcome in consulting. You're like, oh, this is going to be about 170 hours of work. Like nobody actually knows hours, especially anymore. So why are we talking hours? And I have theories around the 2.5 day average, which is what kind of like the gold standard is in
Standard.
fractional, but I'll get off my soapbox for a second.
But why not outcomes? Let me give you
Yeah.
an example. For example, like right now, if you were to show up and you were to say, "Hey, this is your current onboarding experience, 79% of the time this is happening, and you were to show up and you were to say, "Hey, I can get this so that 99% of the time, this is not gonna happen." And if you showed up and you were like, "Hey, but it's gonna take me 4 months at 2.5 days," versus if you showed up and it was like, "Alright, I'll do it for $10,000."
Yeah.
I'd take the $10,000 every single time. So how do we disseminate these outcomes? Because at the end of the day, like, most executives, we hire them for the outcomes, right? I hire them to drive sales, to drive product. So why not outcomes?
So it's a yes and. It's yes,
Yeah,
correct, outcomes. And that's the basis of consulting, like value-based consulting is outcomes. Fractional is a collection of said outcomes put into an SOW. So our platform, what we did is we spent too much time going and actually looking at what deliverables is what we call them. What strategic deliverables are most likely to be put on a scope of work for someone that is working flexibly within this domain? And they are different by stage of company. So the deliverable for an early stage or a scaling startup would be completely different than a small to medium enterprise and a corporate, right? And within our data model, we actually came up with 10 of the strongest deliverables by domain and then tested it. And then basically just went out there and make people pick what are the top 6 deliverables. And what you just described, making sure that you get certain outcomes in sales, whatever. Yeah, that'd be one of 3 to 5 things on an SOW. So in your 2.5 days a week, you aren't just doing one thing, you're managing a couple, think of it as rocks. You're managing some really key rocks and deliverables that you are wholly responsible for. So when somebody is trying to decide if you're doing a good job as a fractional quarter over quarter, they're looking at the 3 or 4 things they hired you for, not just one. And that's the difference is that in consulting, it's usually kind of like a key north star and it needs to zoom around lots of lines of business. Whereas if you're hiring me as a CRO, like how would you scope a CRO? You'd have a bunch of outcomes, right? It's just taking that whole thing and narrowing it down to the top couple that are the most important to the business and staying laser focused on those and getting those like deliverables correct on an SOW is the difference between a successful fractional engagement and somebody basically just being used as a consultant and calling it fractional. And that's the nuance we're trying to help companies do better.
interesting. So you would say, so if 2.5 day equals fractional, if outcome based consultant? Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically if multiple outcome based with strategic scope. And the 2.5 days is it can be anywhere from half a day a week or, call it a couple days a month to 3 days a week is as much as I see fractional. But the reason I keep quoting 2.5 days as this kind of like gold standard is because that's 4 half days in a company with a half day of overflow for comms. And that's just a really nice cadence. So whether you're in the half day in the morning or the afternoon, and then whether you're kind of just zooming across things, people can conceptualize someone working 4 days a week and not doing a full hour, 8 hour day, right? So that 2.5 days a week represents being disproportionately in the majority of a company's cadence. And that's just like, it feels like a full time employee.
That makes sense. How do you think about the back of brain versus front of brain? And so, like, we'll go back to the CTO example.
Yeah.
Let's say that our CTO said, "Hey, I'm gonna give you 2.5 days, and then on Wednesday, I'm gonna give you the early half." My answer would be, I don't care when the fuck you work, but when something breaks, that's on you, right? So how do you guys balance front of brain, back of brain, and also like 2 clients, 3 clients, 4 clients? Like, how do you see fractionals kind of managing their own pipeline of opportunities?
Yeah, well, and this is the thing that's really interesting is that when you look at people that can hack it and people that can't, which I'm just being blunt, like there's a lot of people who call themselves fractional aspirationally, and then they get hired in this model with whatever assumptions the company has. And the next thing they know, they're like, I'm basically just a consultant. Well, that is mutually the responsibility of you as the fractional leader to educate and to actually pre-qualify all of this stuff yourself, because these are not ICs. And this is why I get a bit wound up about people who don't have leadership experience going in and calling themselves fractional leaders, because if you have truly led before, you understand how critical it is to assess what you're just describing. Like, you're embedded in the rhythm of the company. So consultants have the luxury of coming in and being like, "Hey, I'm delivering this to you on these terms, and I only actually work 8 to 5 on whatever," right? Fractional leaders, our job is to go in and do that discovery up front and go, "Matt, you're hiring me. What's your cadence? Like, when are you guys in the office? When do I need to be proportionately in the business? And let's make sure that we have an SLA around, like, I'm on Slack 5 days a week. And even when I'm, not having my day, I'll answer within 3 hours." Like, that business model is the responsibility of the fractional leader to design and to make the leaders that are hiring them comfortable. And a lot of people are doing this great. And there are cool stories of how people are doing it well. But a lot of people, they just think that this is some like easy way out. Like, "Oh, I'll just call myself fractional and I'll get more money and I'm better than a consultant." And it's like, all people who have a fractional leadership skill set can do consulting work. Not all people who've been career consultants are qualified to be fractional leaders. It does not go both ways.
That makes total sense. Is it common, I guess, like, to get as precise as possible, what is the percentage of time that someone starts fractional and then converts to full-time?
Very infrequent, and here's why.
Really?
Because, yeah, it's so when it's not going well, and this is the difference. When somebody gets one gig, then they're going to be significantly higher likelihood to convert back to full time. Because with that one gig ever, like when I'm polling our whole 2,500 person, directory, right? If I say, "How many gigs have you gotten?" If people poll 0 to 1, their likelihood to then go back into full time work is pretty high, because oftentimes that's opportunistic or they're kind of not sure if this is what they're doing. Whereas once they've hit that second gig, they've had 2 engagements in a fractional model. Yeah, almost no one anecdotally that I know that has successfully gotten 2 gigs has been attracted to come back to full-time work. Because what happens is that genuinely, especially out here where a lot of the pay grades are way lower than the US, you can make the same amount working 2.5 to 3 days a week as you can in a 5-day salary. And the life is significantly better, the work is more meaningful. And so what happens is that as soon as people get any traction in this portfolio model, they go, "Why would I go back to full time?" And I've had headhunters come back to me going, "I'm trying to poach this really great guy that's in your directory, and he will not take this amazing opportunity." You're like, "Yeah, they are untethered. They're SaaS now. They're not on premise, dude." Like, you've, they've evolved.
The data says, and I think the number is gonna have to get updated, because the data includes all. I'm assuming from what you were telling me, I'm assuming if in that side, if more than one, then like 90%, but so the data would say
Literally.
60% of independent individuals, would not go full-time no matter how much money was thrown at
Correct.
them.
Correct. That it checks out exactly. And it's higher. It's like, yeah, 90.
And it has persevered through probably the worst economy since probably worse than '08, just because it's been, like, stagnantly terrible for now, like, 3 plus years. So you would assume that last year there'd be a blip in and now there was a blip, or there wasn't a decrease. There was a bit of a smooth, but compared to full-time, we looked like this and full-time looked like this. And so if this wasn't, structural and systemic, it would have blipped, right? Or would have got a drop. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
So, okay, as we
And it's
finish
also
out,
getting better and better. Like, genuinely, I swear every week we are looking at it going, "You are joking me, this person?" Like, people that are top talent are just being like, I'm over it. I'm done. I'm working for myself."
it's a crazy, and then companies keep I mean, for our end, it's a beautiful cycle of companies lay off, people see that, oh, and it's not as stable, but they're
Right.
still damn good. This model, incentivizes performance. And so, okay, you prove you're good, you
Yeah.
get more opportunity, to your point,
Mhm.
2.5 days, probably making more. But then to my point, who cares about the days, right? Like, are you driving more of an impact? Did you have more of a path to impact? If yes, that's great. You're safer than if you're just full time. So it makes total sense. But so before we close, Michelle, give us the data. I know you've been sitting on it. Give us the reality of what is the fractional world today? Where do you see it going tomorrow? Let's hit this head.
Yeah. So, okay. So when you and I were first talking about this, right, there's this kind of like golden $100 million opportunity that investors and, we're raising capital. So it's like we're talking about this all the time. Like, what's the market opportunity? And people go, is this even $100 million market opportunity? Is this worth, looking at? And when we were talking about this, I thought, okay, well, let me try to see if I can actually justify this. So what we are looking at with our tech is we are looking at everybody that is publicly listed and we scrape from LinkedIn. So basically, we have like a real time number of how many people are in our really small talent pools because obviously this is hard to scale. So I'm looking at New Zealand, Singapore, Sydney, and Perth, right? Those are like the four data circles I'm looking at. And across that represents about 2,500 people. So in of that 2,500 people, the average just across the board day rate is $1,500 a day when adjusted for currency. So New Zealand's a little lower and kind of Singapore goes up, but let's just call $1,500 a day the like, average across the board. If we can say that 1 in 4 people that we're looking at have a 2-day-a-week opportunity consistently, they are consistently employed fractionally 2 days a week. That is a $100 million market opportunity. That's $100 million flowing through Asia Pacific in these tiny little markets. So I'm not even saying the whole entire thing. I'm saying these 4 little pools that I'm looking at. If a quarter of the people are getting jobs, boom, there's our $100 million market opportunity. And the reality is I'm not capitalizing on that yet. Like we've just built the infrastructure to even look at it. And all of these marketplaces are popping up and people are trying to capitalize and structure this demand. But I can tell you anecdotally, are 1 in 4 people working? Absolutely. Otherwise, they're not trying to put themselves out there as for hire, right? 1 in 4 is a relatively low bar to only be working 2 days a week. There's people that are working 4 days a week. They're working essentially 5 full days in this model. And so I think that all I can do with my data set is say there's this interesting trend that is indicative of the bigger picture. And in New Zealand, I literally was just looking at it over 2.5 years, this is a 15x growth in the talent pool from 43 to like 800 people. And we've been watching it since it was a drip. And now every week we're getting another dozen people show up. And it's like all of a sudden the market is moving. And in Singapore, it's the same. It's 3 times the size as a year ago. And so what I think is that this is still really early and my numbers are so tiny and they're unscaled. But what it's saying is like there's some movement here. Like there's a market that is just asking to be organized and capitalized, and there's no infrastructure underneath it. So that's what we're kind of trying to do is we're just trying to even like look at it and define it and classify it. And then everybody else in the ecosystem that are building like vetted talent pools and are, hunting, headhunting for fractional, we are all responsible for creating and organizing that market together. There is no competition in an early market like this. Like none of us are capitalizing on this market. People are getting jobs through their first degree network. That is a fact. So I think that there's a real opportunity for all of us, especially those of us building platforms and technology in the space. Like we need to be comparing notes. We need to be trying to organize and capture this demand because it's just going to keep growing exponentially. And if APAC looks like this, I mean, I can only imagine the market opportunity in the US, sizably larger,
It's large. It's large.
and
It's
it's
large and
tiny
painful.
comparatively.
That according to our data, we have there's 1,000 plus solutions. Now, it's large, but it's hard because imagine if you were on a highway and rather than one type of off ramp or one type of on ramp, you had 1,000 plus different ones. And one looked like you need a truck, one all of a sudden goes like this, right? And that's kind of what is happening right now is companies are going, "Hey, we just want, like, one way to engage our talent and one way to give you a job rec or tell us our pain," and then every solution's like, "Oh, I'll do it, I'll do it, I'll do it," and it's like, "Oh, well, I can't work off those MSA terms, and this why are you making me meet with you right now?" So, yeah, it's
Okay,
large
I'm gonna give
but
you some
painful.
levity, Matt. I like just because back in the day when I was in San Francisco, I worked for Salesforce back when it was like no software. Yeah, cool, SaaS,
Yeah,
right?
I remember
Like
that.
back in the
Yeah,
day, right?
software is bad. Remember the
Like,
T-shirts? Yeah.
yeah, I had the T-shirt, right? And like we were all like, people are so dumb. Why don't they understand SaaS? Like, let's have a conversation about you shouldn't be using a desktop. Like that was the level of conversation that we were all having where you're like, why aren't you in perpetual licensing now? Like, why are you still using a desktop? And 15 years ago or whatever that was, right? We were all sitting here thinking 15 years in the future to where we are now, being like, we should be in a completely decentralized infrastructure. Why aren't we now? This is that same feeling is that people are like, it's never going to take off because we're all still on desktops. And it's like, yeah, because within 5 to 10 years, there's that infrastructure is going to keep evolving. And right now, it's that early moment where it's chaos and there's all the vendors going and trying to teach everybody what SaaS is. And it's like, that's cool. We've been here before. It organizes, it's early. So at least that's my 2 cents.
No, you know, and there usually does need to be a catalyst, right? And there is this beautiful catalyst called AI and layoffs right now, and
Really.
I forget the exact number, but it's something like 43% of companies doing layoffs are rehiring contractors, but not telling anyone. I'll get
Yeah.
the exact stat for you, but it's kinda
Oh,
like common sense.
yeah.
Well, duh, the work's not just gonna magically get done by only one, but all right, Michelle, as we close up, most important question, where can our listeners find you and what do you want them to do right now?
Oh, absolutely. Well, everyone can find me on LinkedIn and hear me rant.
Throw the card out.
They can fi they can find me in New Zealand if they take a boat ride or if they are playing from the rest of the world. Our website is fractional.directory, and it's just an open directory that's really easy to look at. And so if you're listening from anywhere in the world, you can hire out of these talent pools. And that's actually something people don't realize is sometimes going and hiring out of Australia, New Zealand, or Singapore remote is a fraction of the cost. Not to, geo arbitrage you, but like you can find more or less the same talent geographically dispersed. And so we're a resource not just for this region, but around the world to basically go and find fractional talent. So check it out and by all means connect with me. Happy to riff on any of these topics.
And listeners in the show notes will have all those links. Michelle, first of many, thank you for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt.